Welcome to MidWeek, folks. Today I'm super excited that I get to interview Colin Harbinson, an elder at IPC. Colin is a lot more than that, but that's what you may know him as. And we're just super excited to be able to share this interview. We try to meet with folks here on MidWeek each week, folks of interest, folks with interesting stories, and I think we have just that for you today. So, Colin, thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Really appreciate being here.
Yeah, so I recall hearing some stories from you at IPC, and I thought, here's a man that I resonate with, and I'm sure that different people will resonate with your story. So, can you take us back to the very start of your Christian life? Let's start there.
I was brought up in a very conservative Brethren Christian home, and I met the Lord when I was 12 years of age, and a life-changing experience even at that young age.
You've been on the road, shall we call it that, for a long time, I would imagine. Um, and in that period of time, from the age of 12 till now, I'm sure that you've experienced God's presence. That's kind of what I wanted to dive into today, and just look at how God has been there. I'm sure you have hundreds of anecdotes that you could share with us today, but do you have any anecdotes, maybe from an early age, before we dive into your adult life, where you felt the presence of God, or knew that He was near?
So the week of my conversion at 12 years of age, the Lord just spoke to me so powerfully for the week leading up to that. And again, just a young kid, but I wept almost solidly for a whole week because the presence of God was so heavy on me. And I just longed to know him and cried out to know him. And after that week, at the end of that week, the Lord just came and transformed my life in an amazing way. And it never changed. It never left. That presence that I felt as a 12-year-old boy has been with me all these years. I don't want to say how many, but it's a good few years, and that's what I love about hearing His voice, knowing His presence, experiencing His leading. It's so real.
That's absolutely fantastic. I think that that some of us from day to day, we sort of forget the indwelling presence of the Spirit, and we might not be focused on that. Um, and it takes, in my opinion and experience, it takes some listening to that. But I want to talk about a young lady in your life um, named Maureen, who I got to know with the Refugee Committee back a number of years ago at IPC. And I thought, what a fiery jack this one is. She's fantastic. And then I knew that two were together, and I thought, what a dynamic duo that is. What can you tell us about how you first met Maureen? And then we'll ask about how you figured out your simpatico when it came to the work of the Lord. But yeah, how you first met your wife.
We met through a mutual friend when I was at university, and Maureen was training to be a nurse. And we met, and Maureen went home that day and said to her mother, I met the man today that I'm going to get married to. And her mother laughed and said, I'm sure it won't be the last that you'll feel that way. Um, but, one of the gifts Maureen has is a gift of discernment. And she discerned that we would actually get married. And it's been a gift to me, totally.
I have shared with you in the past my own parents' experience when it came to them being called to the work, or being called into God's mission. What did that look like for you and Maureen? Was it a together thing? Was it a separate thing, and you came together with and talked about your understanding, or what did that look like?
It was actually individual for both of us, because that's why Maureen entered into the nursing profession, because she felt God was calling her to serve on the mission field. And for me, around about that time, I really felt the Lord had spoken to me that I would be at some point in full-time mission. So I had the passion of an evangelist. I used to go out in my teen years with a ministry that went to the villages of England, and I would stand up as a young teenager on the village greens and would give my testimony and share Christ. So both of us came together and we found that commonality of passion for Jesus, and that call of God upon our lives. And that was such an important thing for both of us. It had to be, because it was central to what we felt God was calling us to do.
Absolutely. What a fantastic story. So individually you're impressed by this call, and then you come together in marriage, and in oneness of mission. That's fantastic. So what did that launch look like? Where did you first find yourselves, and what did you first find yourselves doing?
Well, like a lot of young people, Maureen was 19 when we got married. I was 21, um, and we had children. We had two boys, and we settled down. And um, I wondered sometimes, did I roll over one morning and God spoke to me and I missed him and went back to sleep again? Because, that call that we both felt seemed not to be there anymore, at least not in the forefront of our thinking. And then one day, we were up in the northern part of England, and I was brushing my teeth. And the Lord just spoke to me and said, this was September. And he said, by Christmas, and it was so clear to me, you will be giving up your teaching job and you will be joining this mission organization called Youth with a Mission. And I was familiar with Youth with a Mission because they had a center in the town that we lived in. But this was a total shock to me. So I knew that I had misheard the Lord, because this organization didn't pay any salary. You had to raise all of your own funds, and this was not what God was calling me into.
No, it
So
couldn't be.
couldn't be. So I said to Maureen, I just had the most absurd thought this morning. I felt like the Lord spoke to me that I was to give up my job and join Youth with a Mission. And she said, I know. I said, what do you mean, you know? She said, well, I've known for a year that that's what God's calling us to do. So thank God for a wife that listens to the Lord and is sensitive to his voice and his spirit. And so that was it. Within 3 months, I had resigned from my job. And as a family, we had joined Youth with a Mission. And that's how it all began.
Wow. Listening to the voice of the Lord and discerning His path for your life, that's just tremendous. Where do you first find yourself?
In terms of
In terms of location, where did that call lead you to?
First of all, it led me to England, where, of course, we lived and where I was born. And I went through a discipleship training school with Youth with a Mission, because you couldn't join the organization without that. But I didn't need discipling. I just didn't. I was a preacher. I was an elder. why did I need discipling? Was I in for a surprise, Steve? Because when I went to this school, and I was the oldest one there, I was 33 at the time, and there were a lot of early 20s and so on. You know what? When God began to speak to me, I was the first one to respond. He showed me the horrible pride and arrogance that was in my life. And I realized very quickly that I needed a discipleship training school. I needed discipling. And it was during those 3 months God totally transformed my life.
Mhm.
And the first aspect of missions was we all went on an outreach to Venice, Italy. And I was there with hundreds of other missionaries in training from around Europe. And that was when the first time we launched the drama Toymaker and Son with an adult cast. And so we had our first ministry time there in Venice together. And that was the real beginning of what God had called us to do. And actually, when we got back from that, back to England, through a series of circumstances, the Lord called us to Canada. And we who the Lord had spoken to come with us to help teach our boys, because we were going to Quebec at that time and we needed a teacher. So there were 5 of us, and we crossed the border into Canada with 5 people, 5 suitcases, and $5. That's how we began life in Canada. And that was the base from which we worked around the world with that organization for over 20 years.
So I'm going to come back to the Toy Maker and Son because it's something that not just I am familiar with, but other people I'm sure is familiar with. I've met lots of people actually who said, "Oh, I heard that, or I read that, or not read that, but I read about it. I know about Colin. I've seen the Toy Maker and Son." So I will come back to that, but during the course of your life following the Lord and being on mission for Him and being faithful to Him, um, can you just maybe mention a couple of anecdotes where um, you've really experienced His presence and the world, people without a Christian worldview may see it as coincidence, but you recognized it as providence.
I won't go into the full story, but while we were waiting to come to Canada, a Christian leader came up to me and said, I was praying for you, and the Lord just spoke to me that He was going to give you a car when we were going to America en route to Canada. And I said, what? I don't have money for a car. It didn't make any sense to me at all. Went to bed that night, woke up, and the Lord gave me a picture. I mean, these things don't happen all the time, but I got a photographic picture of this car. And I woke so much so that I woke my wife up in the middle of the night and I shook her awake and I said, the Lord's just spoken to me and shown me a picture of a car. And it was, I mean, in England, we have small cars. This was a big car and it was very clearly American, North American. So we ended up going to the States. And again, just to cut to the chase, we got a car miraculously and we paid $270 for it. And I didn't even know whether it had an engine in it for that price. But we drove to Canada. And as I said, $5 we arrived. And within a very short period of time, I had to renew my insurance for the car. And well, we said, well, maybe we just need to sell it. But we just didn't feel comfortable because it was such a miracle how God had provided this vehicle for us. And so we're literally sitting at the table talking about this, and the phone rings. And it's somebody that I had met once who really knew nothing about me. And he said, we've just had a life group meeting, a small group meeting, and the Lord put it on our heart to pray for you. And he said, as we prayed, we felt like the Lord was saying that you needed some money, something related to your car. And I just almost fell off my chair. And I said, how did you know? He said, how did I know what? He said, we're literally sitting here, I said, and we're talking about how we're going to pay the insurance on our car. And he said, well, you've got it. And they sent the gift immediately. I mean, that was just one of a million stories how God miraculously provided for us along the way on our journey.
So, wow. I cannot wait for. I hope you're writing a book about your life, because I'll be there. I'll be there in line to buy it first, because I love stories of God's providence, of God's provision, of His presence in people's lives, and I know from talking to you and Maureen that. That has been true for you in the entirety of your lives, and in the lives of your kids as well. They must have seen some tremendous things. I know I have. I'm a missionary's kid myself, and I know I have seen some incredibly crazy things happen that can only be the hand of God. Can you think of a story where your kids would have witnessed what can only be God?
Many, actually. And you would understand being a missionary kid, Steve. When Maureen and mean, decided to go into missions without a salary, we got quite a bit of criticism, even within our families, a Christian family. Um, and fellow Christians, I was surprised. And the common question we got, or the comment we got was, well, we understand you and Maureen, feeling that you're supposed to do this, but you've got kids. And why don't you wait until your kids are grown and then do this? Surely this is not a good decision for your family. And so when we went into missions full time, one of the prayers that we had was, Lord, please provide for our children. We want them to grow up with a good understanding of your love and your provision. So would you do that? And God answered those prayers. Let me tell you one example. We were, Maureen and I, with part of a group, we were ministering in Germany to the NATO forces. And we went to a military base there. And the next morning, we got onto the bus that was going to take us to our next ministry stop. And this woman ran up to Maureen and she said, wait a moment, I have something for you. And Maureen was a little confused because she'd never met this woman before. And the woman took an envelope and gave it to Maureen. And she said, I want you to have this. She said, my husband is out on maneuvers and we always make decisions about giving money together, but he's not here. And she said, the Lord just kept waking me up all through the night and said I was to give this money to you. And so she said, here it is, but I have to know, why is it so important for me to give you this money? And Maureen said, well, I want to tell you, it's my son's birthday in a few days. And we wanted to bless him with a camera because he loves visual things and he loves taking photographs. But she said, we didn't have any money. And so I've just been praying to the Lord every day that he would provide that. And she rejoiced and Maureen rejoiced. Just one example. I mean, we didn't even know this lady. She didn't know us, but God spoke to her and God answered our prayers and he provided for our son.
Colin, I love the softness in your voice when you are thinking about the provision that God has made for you over the course of your life. The it really touches you. I hope that people are the audience watching this. You're getting this. That when you and I open up to God's provision, open up to God's speaking, it's something that just sticks with us for the duration of our lives. Absolutely. Colin, over the course of those years, you've been all over the world. What can you tell us about that? What perpetual? So here, let's go back to the toy maker and son, because I have a feeling this is where it weaves into the story. What can you tell us about that? I understand it was a performance-based, arts-based project. What can you tell us about that? How did it come to be? Where did you go with it? What did you do with it? And how did you see God move with it? They're loaded questions, but take it away.
Well, I was an acting headmaster of an English public school. We had great freedom in those days to share Christ in the term. Wouldn't be able to do it today. But before I left to join Youth with a Mission, I wanted to leave my kids, and these were middle school kids, with something that they could grasp in terms of the gospel. And so I woke up one morning and in that dreamy state, I had a picture. And it was a picture of an ancient town, a cobbled street. And I focused in on a little shop that had a sign swaying above the door, and it simply read, Toy Maker and Son. And I immediately knew what God was saying to me. You know, the toy maker was God, toy maker's son was Jesus. And I wrote this parable, if you will, of the Christian story. Went downstairs and got my Pink Floyd music and other music that I used to use in my teaching. And I put together a soundtrack, and within a matter of weeks, it was performed. And little did I know that God was going to take that to over 70 countries around the world. I was invited to do it as an official, a part of the Commonwealth Games, the Olympic Games, the Mundial in Spain, the World Cup events. It was an official part of those events. And because it's a parable, because it was an allegory, it wasn't in your face, like Jesus said, those who have ears to hear, hear. And so I mean, it's had such an amazing impact all around the world. And it's just very exciting. And that was for me the launch of understanding how the arts, how imagination, how creativity is something that is a gift from God. And as we embrace it, not only does it enrich our lives, but we can see it used for God's glory. And I have just seen God use this story in so many amazing ways. It's literally opened up nations, to me. I mean, I was invited, and I still find this hard to believe, but on the very day the communist government was overthrown, I was invited by the new government to go to Russia and to bring spiritual help to them as a nation. And while I was there, they invited me to address all of the new government that had just been elected after the fall of communism. and to come in and speak. And I spoke to them and addressed them. And that night, it went out over the news to over 40 million people. And when they zeroed in for a soundbite, they came into what I said when I said, Christians all over the world are praying for your nation right now. And how does that happen? How do you find yourself, speaking to a whole government? And then just a couple of years later, the vice president of Bulgaria asked me if I would go to that country and bring a similar event there. And at the end of that time, I had a call from a television station. And when I got there, the producer said, do you know this is the number one television station in the country? Over 4 million people tune in every day to listen. And he said, this festival that you have done has impacted this country in such an amazing way. He said, would you please sit down in that chair and would you address our nation? How does that happen? But the Lord had spoken to me that He was going to open the doors of nations through creativity, the imagination, and the arts. And Steve, I just have so many stories of how God has done that in amazing ways.
Absolutely, absolutely. You ask, how does that happen? I think I would hazard to say that the answer to that question is by listening and following. So God has used you and Maureen in miraculous ways around the world to get His gospel, to perpetuate His gospel to so many nations, and just uh, I just think that's absolutely amazing. Um, I would I in conversation with you recently, I understand there's a next chapter, no pun intended, in the story. What can you tell us about the toy maker's son, the next chapter?
I've had a desire for a very long time to introduce this story to a new generation. And many people have wanted me to do a Broadway show, a movie, an animation feature. But what the Lord put on my heart was to do a children's book. And I worked with an illustrator over the last couple of years who lives in New Zealand, and Brian Pollard. And we together have written this children's book. Um, and it's now finished and ready and available, and people are reading it, and we're getting some wonderful feedback. The official launch is not going to be until sometime in June, but I had some special ones shipped to me here from my friends and family here in Canada. So we've been able to just have those be received and responded to. So I'm very excited, Steve, because I just know this story has been used so powerfully, and it's there's no Christian language in it. It's all like, a parable and an allegory. But if you know the story, it's powerfully reinforced. If you don't know the story, it's a great story to read and look at. And who knows how God might speak to you through it.
Oh, well, first of all, I can't wait to get my hands on my special copy. My order is in, and I would encourage folks to do that as well. Colin didn't pay me to say that. He didn't even ask me to say that. He's probably going to be embarrassed that I said that. But no, I've heard the story read, and I've seen the script before, and it's just a tremendous an allegory that you're right, Colin. It doesn't mention scripture verses. It doesn't have any verses in it, any Bible references, so it could be read by any audience, and then filtered that way as well. Colin, thank you for joining us today on Midweek. Thank you for your time. I know you got a lot going on, but I really appreciated this time spent with you, and I'm sure the audience will too as well. I just want to say that I pray that God continues to bless you and Maureen in your future life, and that you have many more years of following Him. Thanks so much for joining us today.
I really, really appreciate that. And thanks for having me on this morning. God bless you.
And folks, we encourage you to join us every week at 10 a.m. here on Midweek for conversations like this one, for encouraging verses as well. So we'll talk to you later. Bye.